Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Vardy here, and I'm finally getting down to making our week 1 instructor video. So in these weekly videos, what I'm going to do is pretty much give you an overview of the week's readings with like gentle pointing to things that I'm hoping that you take away from those readings. And one of the reasons why I want to post these probably around midweek is to give you a chance to actually look through the readings, or at least to start looking through the readings on your own. This week, of course, with the torrential rainstorms that we had yesterday, I don't have Wi-Fi in my house, so I had to figure out a different space to have a video recording for you guys and upload it. So I apologize for the delay there. But I'm hoping to get these videos recorded and uploaded around the Tuesday, Wednesday mark moving forward. So for today, what I want to do is talk through some of the foundational elements of narrative medicine. And one of our readings from this week, the Rita Charon article on attention, representation, and affiliation, is going to kind of serve as our cornerstone for understanding these key principles. So without any further ado, I'm going to switch over to my share screen and talk you through some of the slides that I have. And so let's get to it. Right. Let's share. Okay, so attention, representation, and affiliation. These are the key terms for laying the groundwork for thinking about narrative medicine from a theoretical perspective. And I'll start with this beautiful quote from the Rita Charon article that kind of describes the process. She says, by telling of what we undergo in illness or care of the sick, we are coming to recognize the layered consequences of illness and to acknowledge the fear and hope and love exposed in sickness. So this Charon piece was published in 2005, but Rita Charon is sort of like the founding mother of narrative medicine. She's not the only person, certainly, but her work at Columbia University has led to really kind of the pioneering program around narrative medicine, which has some really cool implications for the practice of medicine writ large. The way that I've been explaining it to folks when I talk about what is narrative medicine, it's thinking about what would happen if healthcare providers learned about stories and how to read stories and how to write stories. Wouldn't that make them better doctors, able to listen to patient stories more effectively? And when I say it like that, people are like, yeah, it would. So that's kind of the foundational exigence for narrative medicine as the subdiscipline or a focus within medical education more broadly. And it really is cool that it focuses both on reading. Rita Charon favors a close reading approach that kind of comes out of her training in literary criticism. James Fellon, who will also read this semester, favors a rhetorical reading approach. So we're going to talk about both of those this semester. But either way, either reading emphasis that you go with, creative writing specifically and storytelling is a key part of narrative medicine. As Charon says, the critical importance that writing has developed within healthcare cannot be overstated. It really does help us think about how people tell stories if we tell stories ourselves. So Charon outlines these 3 cornerstones: attention, representation, and affiliation. And this is not the only place where she writes about it, but I found this article to be probably the most accessible for an introduction to the terms. But I'll go into a little more detail here. So when Charon talks about attention, she talks about empathetic listening. So this is the part, if you imagine, and she does kind of walk you through a sample patient interaction or series of interactions. The attention part is the caregiver paying attention, and not just paying attention, but empathizing. And this is facilitated within narrative medicine practice by close and rhetorical reading. So when we do look at some pieces of fiction over the course of the semester, and we think about, and I will talk about in some of my videos, strategies for reading those pieces of fiction and poetry, we will be practicing that process of attending. And if you think about ways that this can be further applied when we get to our community engagement project, we're going to be thinking a lot about how people tell stories. We'll think about oral histories. We'll think about how do we listen effectively. Because, as Sharon points out in her article, this kind of attention is not just attention to the content of the story or whatever it is that a person might be telling us. It's attending to all sorts of aspects, from their body posture to the form that the story is taking, to even silences. What is someone not telling us? That's something that we're going to kind of keep considering over the course of this semester. Not just what is said, but what is not said. Well, next we come to representation. And for Charon, this is where we start writing. It's externalized listening. So for Rita Charon, representation is rooted in attention. You can't write something without having attended to and listened to a person. Then you can represent what you've heard, what you've listened to. And in this way, representation is different from just creative writing by itself, which might just be making something up in your imagination. But here, representation is a co-creation of a narrative that is part the cared for or the listened to person, and part the listener or the caregiver. So it's developing and co-creating a narrative with the person who's telling their story to you. This is facilitated with creative writing as a practice. So this semester, we are going to take the whole first part of the class and we're going to create writing. And that is going to be stuff that we come up in our imagination. It can be based on experiences we've had. The point is that we're exercising the ability to compose a narrative and thinking through all the parts of a narrative from a writer's perspective. This will help us be able to more smoothly and seamlessly co-create narratives with actual people who might be telling us their stories. And this, for me, as a scholar of rhetoric and composition, is really cool when you think about how many choices, for me, it's rhetorical choices, go into the composition of a piece, be it nonfiction or fiction, creative, nonfiction, any combination of those, because we are constantly recursively developing our writing process and learning how to make those choices more confidently and more strategically. Now, affiliation, this is the piece in Charon's article that you guys are reading this week that is the least developed in that particular piece. But it's developed elsewhere and in other literature more broadly. Affiliation is the sharing of the story with the oral storyteller, with the community members. You're attending to self and you're attending to other, and you're aware of that interplay. So not only are you just saying back what you've heard, co-creating a narrative, but you're actually, this is a practiced empathy, so to speak. You are aware of the connection between yourself and this other person or people. And it's facilitated through sharing our stories and almost reversing the direction. So when somebody says their story, if it's a patient and a caregiver, the patient says the story to the caregiver. The caregiver might write something down for the representation piece. But then when you affiliate, when you're relating back, you reverse those roles. Now, the caregiver is the storyteller, and the patient or the care receiver is the audience. So you're reversing the direction of the story, which kind of brings that loop to a close. And Megard, Schultz, and Woolman talk about this in their article, that affiliation is where the healthcare professional or the caregiver actually joins sides or becomes the ally of the patient, and they share common cause. This becomes hugely important. And many scholars within narrative medicine argue that this is facilitated better, or some people argue that it can only be facilitated through the practice of narrative medicine. So this week, your creative response, which is one of those creative writing assignments that I'm going to have us do to help us prep for that first creative writing portfolio, was the story of your name. And your reflective writing in your journal this week is going to ask you to think through some of the steps and some of the things that you noticed about creating the story of your name. If you haven't written the story of your name yet, that's okay. But when you do, or if you already have, think about any self-insight that comes when you tackle that storytelling practice. How do you choose how to connect the dots, or what do you choose not to tell? These are really important things for us to start noticing week one, because we're going to keep practicing noticing them both in the stories that we choose to tell and in the stories that we read, and eventually in the stories that we collect and listen to. And I think that this is really interesting. When you know that a story is going to be shared, oftentimes it changes how you approach it. So if you've already written the story of your name, consider that. What did you decide knowing that it was going to be a shared discussion? What might you decide if you haven't written the story yet? How does that change your approach? And then also, when we write a story about ourselves, this really helps us quickly fast track to an empathetic position with somebody who is in the position of a patient or someone needing care, because to tell of your illness or your situation or your condition is to tell a personal story, which is exactly what we're doing with this creative response. So these are just some things for us to think about as we consider what it means for us to tell stories. This helps us really think through what it means when we ask someone to share their story with us. So the other readings that I had you guys work with, I am having you listen to a podcast. It's On Being, which is a fabulous podcast in its own right. But Krista Tippett is interviewing Professor Kate Bowler. And if you know of Kate Bowler, to know her is to love her, maybe, or maybe you incredibly dislike her. But she's funny, and I like that about her. And she also has a very moving and widely written about, she's written quite a bit about her experience with cancer. And so she is both a writer, a scholar, and somebody who is in that patient position. And man, I love this podcast because it really talks a lot about all of the messy bits of Krista Tippett says, the true messy fullness of what it means to be in a human body, which is something that we're going to consider as we move through this semester. There is important embodied experience for storytellers that we're going to examine. As you think about this podcast and you're getting ready to get into your reading discussions, or maybe you already have started your reading discussions, here you can get into it as much as you want, but my guidelines here is just what is 1 or 2 lines that just jumped out at you from listening to this podcast? It's harder to annotate a podcast. The transcript is available on the website that I've linked for you, but just think about your response, like 1 or 2 lines that stuck out to you and why, and share that with your reading group this week and see what connections come up for you guys. So that is my slideshow. Another thing that I'm having you guys read this week is some excerpts from Bird by Bird, which is one of my favorite books about writing. And my purpose there, you can certainly discuss those chapters with your reading group, especially if you've never read Anne Lamott before. If you've had me for a teacher, you've probably read some Anne Lamott, if not a bunch, because she's another very funny writer. Bird by Bird is her book on writing. So I wanted to share it with you guys because we are going to be doing some creative writing together. And I think those first few chapters are really helpful when she talks about short assignments and shitty first drafts, and even the chapter on perfectionism, because I think sometimes, especially when we know stories are going to be shared, we can get really trapped by our own perfectionism. So again, if you'd like to talk about that series of chapters with your reading group, please feel free. Otherwise, consider it as sort of like fuel and guidance for the creative writing that we're going to be doing this semester. We're going to read a couple other things by folks who write about writing, and we'll keep talking about that as we go through. Just 2 quick notes of housekeeping before I close out this video. First off, you may have noticed that I put you guys in your small groups for your reading discussions. I did that yesterday, and I hope that everything is going smoothly so far, but I apologize if anyone was surprised by being suddenly in a group. Let me know how those groups are going, and if anyone is having trouble connecting with your group, just shoot me an email, and we'll try to get everything sorted out on my end as best I can. The other thing is, if there's any questions about any of the assignments, I know I did post the course overview video on Monday, but if there's any questions about when things are due or how to access material, please let me know. I've been emailing with some of you already, and it's really great to kind of get to know you through email. I am also available in my physical office, which is on the 9th floor of the Maccabees building. And I am there from 1 to 2 on Tuesdays and most Thursdays. Sometimes I'll have a Zoom meeting at that time. But if you'd like to, you feel free to just stop by, say hello. Or if you'd like to meet me in Zoom, I would love to talk with you. So please feel free, shoot me a quick email and we'll agree on a time that works for both of us. And then we can just meet over Zoom as well. I hope everyone's having a great first week, and I am looking forward to talking and learning more about narrative medicine with you this semester. All right. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.